Silenced while saving the world, the toxic side of nonprofit work. Sometimes we think that working in nonprofits is all about serving the community and everything is just kumbaya. And you may have a hard time believing that there is toxicity working in nonprofits. I admittedly used to believe that. I used to believe that, oh, non-toxic work non-toxic nonprofits are environments where they're all about the community, and I didn't really think about nonprofits being toxic work environments until I encountered Dr. Orletta Caldwell, who schooled me, and I ended up interviewing her on my YouTube channel not that long ago. And so I want to give a shout out to Dr. Orletta Caldwell about that. But I was just surprised. And of course, once I interviewed her, more and more Black women came out about their experiences in toxic environments in the nonprofit world. So if you are a Black woman and you are working in nonprofits, this video is for you. And even if you don't work in nonprofits, I think it's important for us as Black women to really have an understanding of what our sisters would be going through in the nonprofit world. And today we have our guest, Antavia, with us today. And I just want to just say how I came across or met Antavia. So I was scrolling on TikTok, Tiki-Taki, and I saw her posting about being in a toxic job or leaving a toxic job, actually resigning from a toxic job. And she was referencing a LinkedIn post that she did. And the LinkedIn post talked about resigning from a toxic job to protect or to save her mental health. And that really resonated with me. If you watch my YouTube channel, my YouTube videos, my YouTube channel came about as I talked about being in a very toxic job. And I ended up resigning to really save my mental health. And I'm a psychologist and I worked for a mental health unit. So sometimes it gets that bad that you have to resign from a job to save your mental health. So I want to thank Antavia for making that post and being so vocal about that, because sometimes it gets to be that serious. And, of course, we all know that we need to have jobs or make money or things like that. And we don't want to tell anybody to just up and leave a job without, having a plan, because we need money. We got bills to pay. However, there are situations sometimes where it can get that dire, where you are in a situation, a toxic job, and your physical and or your mental health is becoming compromised. So we're going to talk about that. And we're also going to talk about the toxicity in the nonprofit world. So if you don't know me already, I'm Dr. Kamani. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist. I've been licensed for over 20 years. I am also a toxic job survivor, but more importantly, I'm a toxic job liberator for Black women. I'm the co-founder with Marissa Price of the Job Liberation Virtual Summit. The waiting list for the 2026 Virtual Summit is in the description section of this video. If you would like to access the 2025 Virtual Summit, that is also in the description section of this video. So let me turn it over to my guest, Antavia, for you to introduce yourself. Antavia, can you introduce yourself, please?
Hi, so I'm Antavia, and first off, thank you, Dr. Kamani, for having me. I'm very excited to be here. But to give a bit of background, I'm Antavia. I've been working in the nonprofit sector for about 11 years as a nonprofit professional and a fundraiser. I started working in programs with youth, and I've been able to do wonderful programs teaching poetry to youth, as well as helping nonprofits, small, mid-sized to large nonprofits, with their fundraising goals to ensure the work that they do can reach the communities that they're serving. And also in process of that, I'm also a writer, so I do poetry and fiction as well. And so I've had the fortunate opportunity to kind of bridge my love of fundraising and writing to be a grant writer. So that's like kind of what I do for the most part.
So thank you and welcome to this channel. And also, again, I want to thank you for your transparency and talking about your experiences. And I think it's so important for us as Black women to be very transparent about our experiences in toxic work environments because it heals us, but it also helps heal other Black women. And it helps us understand that we're not alone in our experiences. So you mentioned, again, referencing that LinkedIn post,
Mhm.
that you resigned to really save your mental health. So just for us to have an understanding of what was happening to you and why you resigned to really save your mental health, can you give us a little, maybe an overview of what was happening at your job and maybe why you resigned to save your mental health?
Yeah, of course. And I also want to touch on something you mentioned about, talking about this in the open because it's not something that's really talked about. And that's one of the reasons I began posting my story on LinkedIn because I realized that so many people were going through the same thing, but it's kind of taboo to talk about why
Yeah,
you left the workplace. And so I wanted
absolutely.
to kind of share about that because after what I experienced, I felt like I kind of didn't have a voice and I wanted to share my story. So part of my process, I ended up joining a nonprofit as a grants manager, which is very similar to grant writing. And I was the only Black woman on the development team or the fundraising team. And
Mhm.
throughout that process, things started off well, like they normally do in workplaces. I was performing well. I was one of two grant managers that were hired. I think, one of the first red flags, honestly, was I was hired to be one grants manager, but a second one was hired, and it ended up being a white woman with less experience than me. So that was probably the first red flag. But
Mhm.
throughout the process, I began performing well, doing the job description as listed. Throughout the process, I kind of began to notice there were kind of questions, competition in terms of the work that I was doing in comparison to other employees. My
Mhm.
primary supervisor, which ended up being one of the main reasons I left this job, began to question my work ethic. There was typical workplace harm happening, such as shifting of blame of work and responsibilities, gaslighting, and psychological abuse that was happening throughout the process of being accused of not doing work,
Mm.
certain things happening with executive leadership on top of questionable ethics regarding how money was being raised. And so when I would bring those things up, because as a grant writer, it's my job to ensure that ethics within the organization are, clean and clear and that we're representing ourselves well to funders. Um,
Mhm.
Things then begin to shift. What started out as praise and admiration for the work that I do then kind of began to shift into public undermining. So when I would share ideas that were loved and great and accepted in the beginning, kind of
Mhm.
began to become undermined. I was being questioned in front of my peers by my direct supervisor who was leading this development team. And then what became questioning of my work ethic and the work that I was doing shifted into personal intrusion. So social media kind of surveillance and stalking is a strong word, but there began triangulation with the other grants manager that was hired. And so
Mm.
questions about my personal life were being asked.
Oh.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And so at one point, what aside from all of the ethical things that were going on financially and all of the other like undermining of my work and kind of having this experience with my supervisor where I was blamed for, a grant not being written, which ended up being, my supervisor's responsibility and fault. I was in a conversation with this person where he began to change the entire story of how it happened. And I'm like, I was there, so I don't understand why you're saying something happened that didn't. And when I kind of challenged him on his position, he then backtracked and was like, actually, I wasn't trying to say that's what you were doing. And what ended up happening is he began using, public feedback channels to kind of shift the narrative. So if I were to report him, it was kind of already out that I had corrected him and held him accountable. So it looked as if I had reported, it wouldn't have gone well for me.
Mhm.
And then going back to like the personal intrusion, what ended up kind of leading me to make the decision to leave for my own safety is the triangulation that I mentioned. My supervisor began asking questions about my personal life, mentioning that he, followed other people on social media, kind of insinuating that he couldn't find me on social media because I had my whole team.
Inappropriate.
I know. And I had my whole team blocked. And so that's why he couldn't find me on social media. So
Wow.
one day we're having a conversation. He mentions Instagram and how he could see this one person's story. And so He then looks directly into the camera at me, and I'm like, I know he knows that he's blocked because he can't find me. And so I test this theory out. I unblock him, and within 2 days, this person, my supervisor, follows me on social media. And the only way it would have been possible for him to have followed me is that he had to have been repeatedly searching my name
Oh
so
my God.
see my profile. And so I go on vacation for 7 days. Like his follow came through like the day before my vacation. And I began having, because I had all this time, I began thinking about all of these things that just didn't make sense over the course of the last 10 months that I had been there. I
Mhm.
started thinking about what started out as like, excitement and like praise for me being in this position, how they were so excited to have me. I remember earlier on, I thought that my supervisor was flirting with me because I was like, this seems odd. But because I thought they were just excited that I was there, I was like, oh, that's just him saying that he's happy that I'm here. But what began as I'm happy you're here kind of shifted into, in our one-on-ones, he would say things like, I just really love our conversations and it's so great talking with you. But then in public, when I'm suggesting things about, work, I'm getting shut down almost immediately by this same person. And so after the whole social media thing and having that 7 day like vacation of thinking of all these things that wasn't really adding up, wasn't really making sense, I began researching psychological abuse and
Mhm.
psychological manipulation. And I was like, oh, so that's why, these things just weren't making sense. What I thought was flirting that I just didn't want to make any like molehills or mountains out of a molehill, I kind of just ignored. It ended up turning out to be a tactic of this person where I reached out to a previous employee and I was told that this person had been reported 3 times, which made me the fourth woman to report this supervisor for similar behavior that he had been exhibiting with other women who had been in the exact same position as me. And so I was hired to replace the people that he had fired previously for
And,
report.
and no corrective action.
No corrective action whatsoever.
Wow.
Hmm.
That's creepy, actually.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, Antavia, why do you think there was a shift in terms of initially it was, oh, she's doing great. We appreciate it, right? And then it was a shift in terms of how you were perceived and treated.
I think that shift happened when he realized that I was really good at my job, which is the story of a lot of Black women. And what ended up happening is, because I've been doing this work for so long, I told them in my interview, I said I can write grants with my eyes closed. Like this is very easy work for me to do and I love doing it. And they were excited because it made them look great. And I think when it began to, I guess I was doing my job too well, my
Mm-hmm.
supervisor, who apparently had no development or fundraising experience prior to this role, I think began to feel a little intimidated. And I
Uh-huh.
think what shifted was the fact that when I would suggest things, what were great ideas in private, that I later found out that he might have been taking those ideas to his supervisors and his executives. When I would suggest them in public, that was when he would shut them down, but he loved them in private because then he could take them and use them elsewhere.
Okay. Okay. Some thoughts. Some thoughts. Okay. So, okay. In private, loved it. In public,
Mhm.
it was like you were showing him up, right? As
Yeah.
the imposter he was. So he was your supervisor, but
Mhm.
he was deeply insecure and incompetent. So it
Yes.
reminds me again of my dear friend Colette Elizabeth, who said, watch out for these so called supervisors or leaders who are deeply insecure,
Mhm.
incompetent, and immature. That's
Yes,
exactly what he was.
exactly.
So he was trying to cover up that he was a true imposter, right? We had a conversation last week about the so-called imposter syndrome, right?
Okay.
But actually, in this situation, this is a classic example. In many work environments, toxic work environments, these people are the imposters and they get intimidated
Yep,
by our brilliance, right? Now,
exactly.
I was asking you those questions because I had a hypothesis that
Mhm.
this was pet to threat, and you just confirmed it.
Yes.
Okay. So, Black women, if you're not familiar with pet to threat, I'm gonna tell you what it is. Okay. So Antavia laid it out, but I'm gonna tell you what it is. Okay. So pet to threat was created by 3 Black women researchers: Dr. Juanita Johnson Bailey, Dr. Keisha Thomas, Dr. Rosemary Phelps. Pet the Threat deals with a Black woman comes in the workplace. Antavia came into the workplace because of her outstanding work abilities. She knows it. She's brilliant at it, right? They love it. Oh my God, makes the organization looks great, right? And private supervisor loved it. But then Antavia is making the so-called supervisor look bad because he's in public and she's getting all this attention, and it shines the light that he does not know stuff, right? So then it's a shift in terms of Antavia is now the threat, right? And so there's this negative attention on you. Okay, so it's a classic pet to threat. So you started experiencing all these things and you were like, okay, this is deeply, deeply problematic, right? And then you learn about other coworkers or previous coworkers who experienced these things, and there was no corrective action for this guy, this man. Okay. And so at that point, were you starting to experience symptoms like physical, mental health symptoms at that point? Can you share what those were if you're okay with that?
Of course. At one point, there were points where I would go throughout the day because I worked from home. And I think it's important to note that, oftentimes, because I do think it's better for Black women to work remotely. I think it's safer in a lot of ways. But the thing is this job was completely remote and I still experienced all of this while working from my home. And there were moments where, I wasn't eating normally and didn't really think much of it at all because, sometimes I don't just always have a normal eating schedule. I just eat when I'm hungry. But I noticed I wasn't eating normally, wasn't sleeping well. I remember at one point I had gone 20 hours without sleep. And I thought, it's just like normal personal life stress, even though at the time there was nothing really stressful happening. But I'm thinking to myself, it's not work. It can't be work. And I remember it was like 6 o'clock on a Monday morning. So Sunday leading into a Monday. And I couldn't go to sleep for 20 hours. And I was thinking about work, still not thinking that it's work that's stressing me out because I was going through a thing with another person on my team where, this sense of this intimidation that they felt because they wanted to do my job, even though they didn't know how to do the job that I could do. And I remember I messaged my supervisor. I was like, I can't come in today. I don't feel well. And I remember taking a melatonin at 6 o'clock in the morning just so that I could go to sleep because I physically, if I hadn't, I wouldn't have slept that day at all. And so that was kind of what was happening is I would turn my camera off during meetings because I felt like I couldn't handle being perceived. It was just too much to just have to have a presentable face and not, be visibly uncomfortable. And I think what really sealed it for me and how it was showing up physically in my body is I remember, after that 7-day vacation, after, having to reblock my supervisor, I remember joining a call after that vacation, after all of this information that I had been going over all of these memories that I'm like, oh, that was odd and that was not okay and that wasn't normal. And I remember one of my first calls was with my supervisor and 2 other team members. And I was so grateful. And this was the week I resigned. I was so grateful that I wasn't on that call with my supervisor by myself because my hands were literally shaking and I was holding my mug of tea because I'm thinking about how my supervisor just essentially was searching me on social media for months, more than likely, to see if he could find me. And I remember that day, I remember when I turned my camera on, he was immediately uncomfortable and he was shifting out of the camera. At one point, all I could see was his forehead because he now knew that I had reblocked him on social media. And I was I can't do this anymore. And that was what sealed it for me. That was a Monday. And I think I had resigned that Wednesday because I had a one-on-one with him that day. And I was like, I can't join that call. I won't be able to do it.
Oh, that is, oh God. So as you were going through this, right? You were starting to think about, I'm going to resign. Is that what you're starting to think? I'm going to resign.
Yeah, apparently I had been thinking about it for a while. I remember after resigning, I'd gone to my notes app on my phone where I had written a draft of a resignation letter. So I had been thinking about it for months, apparently.
Okay. So if you don't mind me asking this, because I think a lot of Black women play out I want to resign and they'll draft it or they'll imagine it or all those things. but the fear of leaving stops many of us from actually doing it, right? The fear of, oh my God, I want to leave, but I got bills to pay, right?
Yeah.
So what kept you from resigning all those times you thought about it?
Honestly, I think it was the fact that I was like, I need, my job. I need the
Yeah.
money. Like the salary is
Yeah.
decent. It doesn't make sense to leave a good remote job and all of these different things that kind of was stopping me for a while.
Okay. Okay. And so when you actually did resign,
Mhm.
did you experience any fears about resigning?
Surprisingly, no. When I made the decision to resign, I remember it was right after my vacation, and I was, like, on my patio because I have, like, a little small garden out there, and I remember watering my plants going, "I could resign." And when I said that, I felt so much peace, and I walked back into my house smiling, and I was like, "Yeah, I'm gonna resign." And so I felt extreme peace. I attribute that to my faith and to God because I was like, I actually think I might be better not doing this. And when I resigned, it was like a weight had lifted off of my shoulders because I didn't realize how bad it was at all. And I remember describing details to my therapist of what was going on at work. And her
Mhm.
exact words to me were, I don't know if this is narcissism, manipulation, or gaslighting, but she's like, I think you need to file a formal report. And when I
Ooh.
got ready to file that formal report was when I reached out to a previous employee and found out that I was the fourth woman to report him. And so that's when I was like, well, sending this report might not go well. So that's when I decided to resign and report in the same day. And I just left.
So you did file the report.
I did. I filed it and sent my resignation letter at the exact same time. I did
Sign
the
now right here. Take this too.
Mhm.
Okay. Okay. What happened with the report?
So because I thank God for this previous employee because she ended up confirming and affirming for me that what I was experiencing was not this abnormal thing,
Hmm.
that it was something that so many people had experienced and
Hmm.
came to found out it was not just my department, but other departments were experiencing all kinds of things within this
Toxic
organization.
systems.
Exactly. And so when I filed the report and I CC'd the board chair and I went above HR because apparently the HR and legal counsel had been siloing all of the reports, and so they weren't going
Oh my.
there. Yeah, they weren't going anywhere. And so I ended up having to meet with their legal counsel and HR, and I told them, like, I know I'm the fourth woman to report this person. You may not know that I know that, but I know that you've been hiding the reports from the board.
Mm.
And so unfortunately, the board chair apparently didn't care either. And so I found out from another nonprofit colleague, he'd gone through something similar. He ended up meeting with their board chair, and the board did absolutely nothing. And so, what I'm now finding out through other peers and nonprofit professionals is that even when you go up the ladder, there's not much that's happening. And the board chairs, who are supposed to hold nonprofits accountable, hold executive directors accountable, there's nothing happening. And so people are kind of stuck, not really knowing where to go, who to report them to, because outside of a board, there is no other kind of umbrella of accountability outside of,
Mm.
reporting to the IRS if they're doing something, fiscally irresponsible. So,
Right,
mhm,
right. So not only in terms of the image of nonprofits there to serve the community, many people also think that nonprofits really look out for the staff,
yeah,
right? And that there's a system in place to really, but no, not necessarily. That's not true. Okay. I'm sorry about that. That's
yeah,
insane. That's insane. So I want to also go back to something because you mentioned about being in therapy, and I just want to just give a shout out to therapy because I'm a therapist. But can you talk a little bit about the role that therapy played
mhm.
in your experience of being in a toxic job and being able to resign?
Yeah, honestly, therapy for me, I honestly don't think if I hadn't heard those words from my therapist, I don't know if I would have resigned when I did, because what it helped me realize is that one, what I was going through was not normal. And so it was helpful to have language to apply to the behavior that I was just like, oh, it's just, they don't like me, or, I could be friendlier because, everybody goes through that thing of, well, maybe I just need to like try talking more, try being more friendly. And so when I explained like the depth of what I was experiencing, and her words were like, this could be narcissism, gaslighting, manipulation, or all three. That's when I was like, okay, this means that this is actually pretty serious and that I should be taking my safety and my mental health a bit more seriously instead of just trying to be more friendly. And so
Yeah.
I think therapy was very helpful in helping me apply language to very serious psychologically abusive behavior that I don't
Hmm.
think I would have been able to, clock or notice without it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm so glad that you mentioned that. So therapy was helpful for you. But you also, I think you mentioned in the LinkedIn post that the employer was trying to block you from getting unemployment benefits.
Yes. So I not okay. So when I left, I was also experiencing their legal counsel repeatedly watching my LinkedIn. So they were trying to see what I was saying about the organization. So I had like apparently I don't know who within the organization, but it had gotten out that I had been posting about the organization. To at one point, about 30% of my views on my posts were coming from this organization. So
Oh.
was including their legal counsel, including HR, including other people within leadership positions within the company. And so when I applied for unemployment, I was initially denied. I had to appeal unemployment. The appeal, I ended up having to reappeal the appeal, and so it was a terrible
Wow.
long situation that, and even unfortunately, I still actually never got unemployment, and that was 6 months ago. And
Oh my
ended up
gosh.
being extremely difficult because, in the way, especially with the Texas Workforce Commission in Texas, obviously employers, like their word is, it kind of trumps the person who leaves. And so even though I could prove why I left and how I left, it was still initially and then secondly denied, unfortunately.
Hmm. Oh
Mhm.
my God. So there was like trauma upon trauma,
Yes.
right? And
Yes.
so I echo what Marissa said. That's terrible. So
Mhm.
sorry that all that happened to you. And you said that was about 6 months ago?
Yes, about 6 months ago. Mhm.
Wow. And when I think about all that you went through, right?
Mhm.
When you think about where you are now, would you or do you have any regrets about resigning?
I have none. I have 0 regrets about resigning from that job at all, and I think for me, what I think was helpful is that, 1, I was taking myself seriously and understood that I deserved better. I think what even helped further my decision was when I realized I was the 4th woman and that no one had gone public before and no one had kind of made posts about them, because even though I never named them, the
Mhm.
people who know who they are, they know that I'm talking about them. And so it was,
Mhm.
um, I think it was very helpful to get the information out, because then I was able to connect with other employees who left and had started their own nonprofit because they were like, we can't do this anymore. And
Mhm.
so it was a connection that I made with a previous employee who had also left for the exact same reasons. And she ended up kind of telling me that, donors now know, some of the donors have left this nonprofit,
Mhm.
volunteers are aware, and so were other staff. And so I think, if anything, it helped spread awareness for the people who were still there that this
Yeah.
was happening, and also created a space for people to understand that what they're going through was not normal and is not normal. And so it was, um, I think it was a great experience to be able to let other people know that they weren't alone, if that makes any sense. I think it was worth it in
Absolutely.
that regard.
Absolutely, right? It's like we don't want these terrible things to happen to us.
Mhm.
However, and sometimes we'll feel like, you know what, with this market, like you should just stick it out and, whatever. I mean, at least you can just navigate. But we have to think about prioritizing our own health, number
Mhm.
one. And we think about these environments, it's we have to think about when we're silent about it. And I think it was Zora Neale Hurston who mentioned this. I think it was Zora Neale Hurston when she said that when we're silent about our pain, that people will say we enjoyed it,
Yep.
right? And
Mhm.
so sometimes we have to be the truth tellers about our pain because other people can relate to it. The
Yep.
other thing is that people who are still in that environment will feel like, oh my God. I know I'm not alone in this experience. And so I so appreciate Antavia. Thank you so much for sharing this. And for Black women who maybe are not at that job, but maybe at other nonprofits, because I see that people are saying, don't go to nonprofits, right? I've
Yeah.
been to nonprofits, don't go, don't go, don't go. And so
Mhm.
we're going to talk a little bit more about, just a pattern of things, because you said you've worked at several nonprofits. And again, I'm like, whoa, like what's going on with nonprofits? Because
Mhm.
again, so many of us think that nonprofits, they're to serve the community. What's going on? So let's talk about that. So
Mhm.
why is it that nonprofits have this, noble mission and we think this one thing? Thank you, Marissa.
I like
Yes. Okay, this is the quote. If you are silent about your pain, they will kill you and say you enjoyed it. Yes. So that is Dornell Hurston. So that is why it's important to speak up. And actually, I heard Stephanie Perry mention this on her Sunday Live when she talked about, people sometimes say, or I get the message sometimes, oh, you're so brave that you left. You're so brave that you resigned. I could never do that. And I say, you know what? Oh, this is another comment. Yes, thank you, Carla. Your silence will not protect you. It won't protect you. Absolutely not. Thank you, Carla. But something that, people would say to me, you're so brave that you resigned. I'm not like you. I could never do that. And
Mhm.
I'm very clear. Yeah, we're not the same people. However, I'm really not so different from any Black woman. I
Mhm.
really am not so different. But the
Yeah.
thing about it is that what Stephanie said on her live, Stephanie Perry said, she said, action is the antidote to fear. Okay. I am a very action oriented person. So if I am feeling a certain kind of way, I take action. Okay. So
Mhm.
maybe that's the difference with other people, right? That when
Mhm.
I feel a certain way, I take action. But I am not just a fearless person. I'm not just like I feel fear and I'm just fear. No, I'm not. I am scared. I'm terrified. When I was at the toxic job, I was terrified of leaving. And I've
Yeah.
been very vocal about that. I'm not discounting or dismissing the fear
Mhm.
involved in a toxic job. Not at all. Okay. But I could not stay in that environment because it was killing me, number one. Number two, it was so miserable for me that I had to take action. So again, the way that I dealt with my fear was to come up with an exit plan and
Mhm.
get out of there. Okay. So the antidote to my fear, quoting Stephanie Perry, was to take action. And so that is what I'm trying to support Black women right now is to plan to take action. So
Mhm.
Antavia, again, I appreciate that you're sharing about how you've taken action and
Mhm.
that you don't have any regrets for leaving. And I absolutely don't have any regrets. And that's why I wanted to ask you because
Yeah.
sometimes Black women feel that there is like a sense of like giving up if you leave or, you let them win. I'm like, let them win what?
Exactly.
Let them win what? I've
Mhm.
saved myself. Like I'm
Yeah.
in a much better place. What are you talking about?
Mhm.
Right? So we have to really adjust that mentality. So I digress. But can we talk again about or go back to that notion that we think that nonprofits are one way, but
Yeah.
they're really this way. So what's going on here? What can you take us behind the scenes
Of
of
course.
nonprofits?
Yes. And I actually I did a LinkedIn article called Workplace Trauma Isn't Another Bullet Point. And I talked about in the nonprofit space because they lead with language like psychological safety and they're very
Mm,
moral and values driven. And it's very easy to kind of take that language and kind of manipulate it because no one comes into the nonprofit space to kind of, well, most people don't come in to commandeer and to dominate. They come because they want to be a part of a mission and vision that's making real tangible difference in communities because it's needed and it's necessary and community is vital. But
mhm,
what ends up happening is you have people who are coming in with the wrong intentions, people who are moving up the ladder
mhm,
into leadership positions. And because it's very morals and values driven, it's very easy to change that language and manipulate it to be something that it's not. I once worked at a nonprofit where we would say things like community is important, but even that became weaponized to where if you wanted to kind of sit alone for 15 minutes, someone would go, but what about community? And it's very like simple things that becomes very insidious, like language becomes changed to mean something else. I mean, the nonprofit that I left that we were talking about, in our handbook, we had a whole, clause for psychological safety and what that means and what that looks like. And in our employee monthly meetings where we're all coming together, and we would have meditations in the beginning of the all staff employee meetings, and we would talk about the ways in which we're building community, while at the same time you're having women like me wondering if their supervisor's flirting with them and being stalked on social media, but at the same time this same supervisor is using language like saying good morning happy humans and like doing normal
Oh,
like language things that gets manipulated and it gets shifted and it gets changed. But because we're in a system that prioritizes optics and prioritizes the idea of values, the idea of morality, than the actual intention of what you're doing via your actions, it's very
mhm.
easy to kind of ignore it because people don't like dealing with hard things. And so that's kind of one of the ways that I think about it. It's also, I mentioned before that I worked in churches, and so it's kind of this idea of authoritative abuse where people are charismatic, but under that charisma they're hiding very shady intentions. And I think it's kind of the same in the nonprofit space, if that makes sense.
Mm, absolutely.
Mhm.
And I agree with Marissa. So, and what you mentioned too, they co-opt the language, and also there's a disconnect between what they say and what they do,
Exactly.
right? So
100%.
it's like I remember James Baldwin's quote, right? I can't believe what you say because I see what you do,
Yes. Mhm.
right? So you're saying I'm doing this, but then you stalking me on social media.
Yeah. Yeah.
What's up my psychological safety?
Hmm.
What are we doing here? Okay. So, and I think about as Black women, just in terms of in the workplace and just in life, we're often tasked with like being the strong Black woman. We come save people, we just do everything, right? So, I can imagine in a nonprofit world that Black women are tasked to like carry
Hmm.
the heavy loads and be the saviors and take care of everything. So, can we talk about how does that look in the nonprofit world, or how have you experienced that in the nonprofits that you've worked in?
Honestly, I have the perfect example for this. So, at one point with the organization that I recently left, we had an in-person all-staff meeting, in-person development team retreat, and we ended up having to do this, personality test. Workplaces love doing personality tests, and so we took, I think it's called like the high five. I can't recall the exact title of it, but we each had to take this test, and then we like went over our results in person as a group. And
Mhm,
I remember that one of the highest ones I got was called Commander, which means I don't shy away from conflict. I like having hard conversations and I can kind of
mhm,
deal with things head on.
mhm,
Everyone else on the team kind of got people pleaser. And
mhm,
I remember at one point the supervisor goes, now we know who to bring in when we have to have hard conversations. And so what ended up happening is, because I'm not conflict averse, I ended up being the person that they wanted to have the hard conversations about what happens when money went missing, even though it happened before I came into the organization. And it became this sense of, because going back to being good at my job, which is just simple work experience that I've acquired over the years, and
mhm,
because I was working with people who didn't have the same amount of work experience and had been in one nonprofit their entire career. And unfortunately, that nonprofit didn't do things the right way, equitably, or in any other way. The experience, there was a mismatch. And so, because I just happened to have this experience and be good at my job, it became, well, Antavia can do this, or Antavia just works faster because I was just good at what I do. And so the other grants manager that ended up getting hired at the same time as I did, we had the exact same job description, but because of the way that our work ethics are, I began to naturally outperform her, which then became, not only was the expectation that Intavia does this and this person doesn't, if I happened to just slow down for 1 week because my load was light, it was then kind of picked on. And I was kind of being asked, well, why aren't you doing the same workload that you've been doing, even though last week I wrote a $3 million grant and the other person wrote a $15,000 grant. And so it was kind of this either, damned if you do, damned if you don't type of mentality where I could show up and do everything. But then if I'm doing something different the next week, then it's kind of like, what are you doing? So I couldn't, it was almost as if I was hyper vigilant because I couldn't slow down. And if I went too fast, I was expected to be fast all the time, if that makes
Mhm.
sense. So it was a,
Okay. Yeah, I'm having a reaction just like Marissa is. That was an entirely different role. So you can have hard conversations. So in addition to your regular role, let's have you do these other roles.
mhm,
That's somebody else's job to be having these hard conversations.
mhm, mhm,
That's insane. That is insane. That's absolutely insane. So what man, okay. So you had to do all this stuff, right? And when I think about, you just performed, right? You just performed. I think a lot of Black women in these situations, we just perform. We might feel like this is not right, it's not right, but we just perform because many times as Black women, we are mission driven, right? We believe in the organization, we're there for the community. And so many times we stay in these nonprofits, not only because we need a job, but because we believe in the mission, right? And so we give, we give, we give, we give. Is that also a reason why sometimes we stay?
mhm,
And I'm wondering, are there times where our identity becomes fused with the mission of the organization? And then it feels like you're the backbone of the organization, or the organization would kind of fall apart if you weren't there,
mhm.
or people would know what to do if you weren't there. Is that also a part of what makes it so hard for us, where we give so much emotional labor? Our identity becomes part of the organization, that it's very difficult for us to step away.
100%. Because in my experience, in the myriad of nonprofits I worked at, every nonprofit I joined is because I love the mission and I love the vision and I wanted to stay because I'm like, I love the work that they do. I love the people that I'm meeting in the community. I love like working with kids at this one organization, and at the one that I previously left, I was like, this is great work. We're helping people in recovery. And especially for me, at one point, it felt like I was the only one kind of upholding the moral infrastructure of the entire fundraising team. And
Mm,
so I'm having to correct, how we're representing ourselves to organizations so that we don't lose funding the next year because I'm being asked to do things that were borderline, fundraising malpractice. And I'm having to say, no, we can't do that. If we do this, we won't get funding the next year. If we do this, they're going to remember our names and we're going to not be able to, kind of receive funding and kind of be, a long-term partnership. Like we're destroying relationships if we keep moving like this.
mm,
And it got to the point where I was like, I do care deeply about the mission, but I can't keep expending, my own sanity and my own, integrity by trying to uphold something that no one else is helping me like hold this beam up. And so it's kind of like, I do think Black women are naturally, we care a lot and we want to invest in something that's, beautiful and worth investing in and it's making a difference. And I think that's kind of the crux of what's happening in the nonprofit space is people want to make a difference. People
yeah,
care about the communities, but that gets taken advantage of because I think people know that. A lot of
yeah,
people in leadership love to say, you're here for the mission and you're here for the vision, which means you expend any energy and resource because you care about the people. And that's
mm,
oftentimes, again, it's misused and it's abused
mm,
to get people to stay. And
mm,
it's not helpful. And I think a lot of the times we have to then take a step back and go, how is this affecting me? And how is this affecting my mental health and even my professional integrity? And
mm,
figure out the next steps to take and whether that's staying and whether that's leaving or making a plan and choosing to exit later. And so
mm.
it's definitely something I've experienced in many nonprofits that I've worked in.
Yeah, and I also think that, many times as Black women, we're very relational and very committed to our community.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking about, like, particularly Black women who may be from that community that they're working in. So
Mhm.
there's a greater level of commitment to doing the work. And so when I think about the other Black women that you work with, what have been some of the emotional consequences that you've observed of other Black women who've been in these nonprofits? What have you observed of maybe other Black women?
And so this is so interesting because I've seen this play out in Black-led nonprofits as well as white-led nonprofits, and it's
Mhm.
which that is a whole different
Ooh,
conversation that leads
that's
into
fascinating.
white proximity conversation. Because when you have
Ooh, that's
a yeah,
Antavia, we got to go into that. Okay. After you answer that, we're going to have to pivot to that a little bit. Okay.
of course. And so I've seen a lot of Black women in organizations who are often underpaid, often kind of again carrying the moral weight and infrastructure of an organization because they are working directly with the community and feel that if they leave, then who will the community look to if this person steps out of this role? And then when you have, executive leadership and you have board chairs who don't particularly, I mean, they're not usually the ones dealing with the community in the first place. They're dealing with the donors. So they're donor facing. They're not even most of the time paying attention to what the community is doing. That's typically program staff. That's typically, the community roles and helping kind of be boots on the ground type of people.
Mhm.
And a lot of the times they are overworked. They aren't paid enough. They are trying to communicate to the development team, like, what they need funding wise. And because the philanthropic space has become this kind of almost buddy system with like donors, that's becoming the nonprofit space. Is we care about donors, we care about what they want to fund, and what ends up happening is the community gets pushed to the wayside. So you have program teams, community leaders trying to say, hey, our community's asking for this. And so not only are they underpaid and overworked, they're not being listened to. And if programs teams and community leaders aren't being listened to, that means the community that the nonprofit is being set out to serve, they're not being listened to. And so there's this whole thing that, it's kind of heartbreaking and sad. And it's like, I'm getting my master's in philanthropic studies, and so studying the origins of philanthropy to kind of help understand the trajectory of it. And it's this history of philanthropy that is not ever really focusing on the people who need help the most, and it's not focusing on the people doing the boots on the ground work.
Well, then what's the purpose of it?
Yeah.
I'm asking, like, what's the purpose of it? Because it just feels like, okay, you have these donors,
Mhm.
so-called to help the community, right?
Mhm.
But what I'm hearing you say is that there's more focus on pleasing the donors, and there's a disconnect of listening what the people in the community want. So
Mhm.
there's a focus on them and not the community, even though the nonprofit is supposed to be for the community. So I'm literally asking,
Mhm.
what's the purpose of the nonprofit?
And to be honest, that is a question that I'm asking myself and why I'm getting my master's in philanthropic studies. And as this one comment by the Luxury Bucket List says, they said it's networking for the elite donors and tax write-offs, but the workers aren't respected. And to
That
be
is,
honest, that's kind of the core of it. That it really is. It's this sense that,
wow.
because it's called donor-centric fundraising. So my role is to come in is to help raise funds for the community. What ends up happening is we have donors who, because they give so much money, what they say sometimes is what goes. And so I once worked for a nonprofit that, this nonprofit had been there for 40 years. People who had lived in the community had been there longer than the nonprofit.
Mhm.
They then started a revitalization process where they started bringing in new buildings and bringing in kind of this corporate infrastructure that the community hadn't asked for. So instead of building a grocery store, instead of building things to create jobs, instead they built a $9 million performing arts center, and were getting angry that people weren't selling their houses so that they could build parking lots. Like that's the kind of thing that we're talking about when it comes to the nonprofit space. That, in my honest opinion, there needs to be an entire complete restructuring of what the nonprofit industry is focusing on what philanthropy is. And there's people like me and others in my course, and other like people like Edgar Villanueva and all of these other great people who are trying to kind of ask the hard questions about the philanthropic space, because as someone else said, a lot of nonprofits are low-key kind of scams in a way,
Yeah,
unfortunately.
yeah. That's
Unfortunately.
horrible.
Hmm.
That's horrible. And the thing about it is that people in the community trust these organizations.
Exactly. Yeah. especially when you bring into account that when we're talking about, basic needs, we're talking about food deserts, we're talking about education, after school programs, where, one nonprofit I worked at in South Dallas, like there's not a grocery store within a mile radius. And when you think of downtown Dallas, it's surrounded by highways. It's surrounded by, literal, I can't think of the overpasses. And so think of someone trying to walk to a grocery store. It's completely and totally unsafe for them to do so. And so their only course of action to feed their families is a food pantry that may run out of food by the end of the week. And so you have a nonprofit that is at the same time, while we're talking about a community that was once surrounded by 40 liquor stores and has one food pantry and no grocery store, but they have a $9 million performing arts center. Like
Oh
it's
my gosh.
adding up.
Wow. Well, thank God that you're in this program because you're going to help so many people. And I feel like sometimes we need people like you in these programs to really uh, speak the truth about what's going on in these organizations, right? And to really be a transformative change. So thank you. Thank you for being in this program. Oh
Yeah.
my God, that's just so
Yeah.
outrageous and just disgusting, honestly disgusting. Oh my God. So if we were to think about for Black women, well, let's take a step back.
Yeah.
If you were thinking about, because I asked you earlier about working in nonprofits, and I said, do you want to continue to work in nonprofits? And you said yes, right? Because that's where your heart is. So if you were able to talk to your younger self,
Mm-hmm.
or if you were able to talk to a Black woman, young Black woman, or Black woman who's decided to go into nonprofits, to work in nonprofits, what words of wisdom could you offer?
Mm-hmm. I think words of wisdom I would offer to my younger self or any other Black woman working or wanting to get into this
Mhm,
space,
mhm,
I would say understanding your integrity, your morals and values, and what you won't bend on,
mhm,
and to kind of continue on the James Baldwin train. One of my favorite quotes is James Baldwin is talking about America, and he says, "I love America, therefore I reserve the right to critique her or criticize her perpetually." And
mhm,
it's one of my favorite quotes, and it's how I think about the nonprofit sector, is
mhm,
that just because you love something doesn't mean you don't want it to be better. And I think for people coming into the nonprofit space, I think it serves people well to understand the kind of space they're entering, but
mhm,
also what is it that you want when you come into this space? Are you coming to help? And if you're coming to help, I think it helps knowing the history and the origins of the space, because I think remembering that and remembering what you want to do will kind of help you when things get hard and when
mhm,
things get difficult, if that makes sense.
mhm,
I'm hoping that kind of offers a sense of hope, because it's not that I wouldn't recommend not to go into the nonprofit space, because you
mhm,
can go into corporate and experience the same thing. You can go into a ministry environment and experience the exact same thing. I
mhm,
think this is workplace harm is an overall situation, not just a nonprofit situation. But I think knowing your why and knowing what you want bend on, and knowing that coming into the nonprofit space is not going to be easy just because we're here to help people, because
mhm.
people will be people, and if you aren't healed and hurt people, that's everywhere. And so
Yes.
I think that's something to keep in mind.
Yeah. Okay. So that's more the proactive. Let's think about for Black women who are watching right now, who are currently in the nonprofit space,
Yeah.
and you are speaking to them like, oh my goodness, this is my reality right now. I'm
Mm.
in the nonprofit. I am struggling right now. What words of wisdom can you offer to Black women who might be struggling right now, who are working in nonprofits?
If you're struggling right now in the nonprofit space, I would say, that's a good question. I have to think about that for a second. Because I feel like I'm trying to think of what my experience was like and what I would have wanted to hear.
Mm,
And I would say that, one, this is something I say to people because since I started posting on LinkedIn, I've had people reach out to me and telling me that they've experienced the same thing. And the first thing that I always say is that it's not your fault. There's nothing wrong with you. You are not some outlier and that you're the problem. I think it's important to know that what you're experiencing is not anything that you did, and you existing differently in the world would not change what you're experiencing. And that's something that I needed to hear, that it was not me, because it's very easy for people in the space that you're experiencing it to make them for them to make you think that it's you. And I
True.
would say, secondly, if you're struggling and you're trying to figure out what to do next and how to, like, I guess, get out, I
Mhm.
always tell people, and this advice comes from my mom, is to document everything. I
Mhm.
think this is, and it sounds so, I feel like it can sound scary when people say start documenting, but I think if anything, that's what helped me in my experience is I was able to have proof of what I was experiencing, because the first thing people will ask you is to prove it.
True.
Honestly, that's what they're going to say. And I think documenting, even when it's hard and even when you feel like you don't know what else to do, that's kind of was my saving grace in that moment, because it was what helped me to kind of understand that I wasn't crazy and that what I was experiencing is what I was actually
True.
experiencing. If that,
True.
yeah.
Absolutely, right? Because the stuff, because they were trying to gaslight you about what's happening. And so it's very common when you're in these toxic work environments that they try to gaslight you. And so therapy is good to help you so you don't start self gaslighting yourself, but also documentation can help with the self gaslighting too. It's like, wait a
Mhm.
minute, that really did happen. Like, that's crazy that they tried to make me think that that happened. No, it
Mhm.
happened this way. And so, again, documentation is important to help you with self gaslighting, but also so you have a record of
Yes.
exactly what happened. So,
Mhm.
Antavia, as we're starting to wind down, because we're going to read the community chat as well. So, as we're starting to wind down, can you please share with the audience about services or products that you offer, as well as your social media handles?
Yeah, of course. So I am also a grants consultant and nonprofit consultant, and I also write poetry and fiction. So I offer grant writing services, and I have poetry books under Pen of the Beloved. So you can find my grant writing services and my books and social media under the moniker Pen of the Beloved, and it's pretty much everywhere. I'm on YouTube, on TikTok, as well as on Instagram. And so, yeah.
Awesome. Okay. So I'm going to read the community chat. If you have any questions for Antavia, then make sure you put in the chat. Okay. So, hey, Cynthia, good to see you. This looks like a good topic. I haven't heard it discussed before. Wow. Hey, Marissa. Hi, everyone. I work for two nonprofits and both were toxic. Do not recommend. So glad you are free, sis. Yes, absolutely. Let's see. It was truly traumatic. Shout out to the truth tellers. Yes.
Mhm.
Celebrating your liberation. This is what I love about this community is that we celebrate Black women who are able to leave a toxic job. So thank you, community, for uplifting. Yes.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for sharing your story. Let's see. Yes, there was a whole psychological safety arm at the toxic job I was into. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. The dirty secret in nonprofits, they bank on idealistic employees, tolerate nonsense from management in the name of the greater good.
Yes.
Hmm.
Mhm.
That's very interesting. So it's like they seem to kind of gravitate or kind of seek people who are again mission driven.
Yes, exactly.
Mission driven.
Mhm.
Yeah. And it's interesting what you said about, I wrote this down, people coming in with the wrong intentions. And it's
Mhm.
interesting that often those people become the managers.
Yes.
That's very disturbing. But I've seen that in so many different times, right?
Yeah.
The language becomes a figurative weapon for manipulation. It's all performative. We talked about Clifton strengths, so they try to evaluate what your strengths are. But
Mhm.
that was so manipulative. What they did, Antavia, was like they saw what you excelled in and tried to manipulate you and tried to exploit your labor.
Mhm.
Ridiculous. I found most industries that don't pay well don't treat you well in America. The high paying jobs aren't much better, but I was treated better as a management consultant than I
Mhm.
was as a teacher.
Yeah.
Okay.
And could
That
I
being,
point
oh,
to that Exactly. And something I've noticed, I've been in the nonprofit sector for 11 years, and the common theme is that you don't get paid well in the nonprofit sector, is what it was when I first got in. And what
Mhm.
I noticed earlier about wrong people getting into positions, what's now
Mhm.
happening is in a lot of these leadership roles in the nonprofit space, the salaries are kind of upticking. And so you're getting six-figure salaries in leadership roles in the nonprofit space. And that's kind of something I noticed with my direct supervisor. He had no experience in the nonprofit sector at all before he got in, but was able to get a director of development role. And so that's something that's also happening, is you have people kind of gravitating to the space because they think it's easy work and because the salaries are getting better. And that's something that I don't think we're talking about enough in the nonprofit space.
Antavia, how did he get that job?
I have no idea. I have no idea. He
No
apparently
nonprofit experience?
apparently he came in as a consultant, and when the role opened up, somehow he was then placed into a director of development role.
Oh my goodness.
Mhm.
Okay, this I have a follow-up question to that. So you said that the salaries are going up for those in leadership roles. Are
Yes.
the salaries also going up for people who are not in leadership?
Program roles are typically, unless it's like a director type of program role, like you're over program's entirety, again,
Mhm.
the boots on the ground people are typically not getting paid that well, and they're typically getting paid the least. Even in terms of like grant, like a simple grant writer role,
Mhm.
those salaries are now starting to see a bit of an increase. But I want to say about 3 years ago, I had a role that was like $47,000 for a grant writer role, which is ridiculous because grant writers are sometimes quite literally the backbone of development teams. And so there's this whole misconception of grant writers just sit behind a computer and they write all day, but a lot of times they're project managers, they're helping with programs, they're ascertaining like budgets and fiscal responsibilities while also helping manage donors. And so there's a lot of kind of role padding within the nonprofit space. And so a grant writer is never just writing, they're oftentimes managing multiple things and essentially are many directors of development sometimes, actually.
Okay, Antavia, you may have seen this expression on my face because I'm totally confused again, right? This is okay. Please help me out. This is what I don't understand. Okay, so not only the whole thing about the focus on pleasing the donors, not listen to the community. That's the one thing that's like, what? The
Yeah.
other thing that does not make any sense is that those in leadership positions, their salaries are increasing.
Hmm.
The program staff that work in the community or the grant writers, their salaries are not increasing.
Hmm.
So what justifies those in leadership getting increased salaries? What
Honestly, I
justifies that?
do. I think it's very disproportionate to the work that is happening on the nonprofit scale. I've been in organizations where executive directors are making $300,000.
No, stop it.
Yes, making $300,000 plus, while you have people still making $50,000, $70,000 doing the bulk of the work for a
What?
nonprofit. Yeah. Hmm. It's ridiculous. And then the what most people are told is that because it's nonprofit, you knew what the salaries were like when you came into the role. And so it's a lot of gaslighting happening in the nonprofit.
But what justifies that?
Honestly, I saw someone make a comment about having a network for it. I think in a lot of ways, there are people who start nonprofits that have um, financial backers who are able to kind of siphon money into their nonprofit that they've created. So you have people who have friends who are wealthy who decide one day, I want to start a nonprofit, and so they do. You have donors who will give money towards specific salaries for specific roles, and so executive directors will get a pay bump because a donor decided to pay more money that year specifically for a salary, because donors can give to whatever they want to give to, and you can kind of justify it. One nonprofit I worked with, they had a financial backer that was funding more than 40% of their budget, and it's one of the wealthiest people in like there's a list of billionaires, and they are on that list, and they are funding more than 40% of a nonprofit's budget. And so
So,
it's crazy.
wow. So,
Mhm.
in your experience, are the executive directors are they chosen by who? How do they choose executive directors?
So usually executive directors, you can apply to be an executive director. Sometimes boards will choose an executive director. A lot of times it's going back to the luxury bucket list made a comment about connections and networks. Sometimes if a role opens up, the board will say, well, I have this friend who used to work at this nonprofit, and they'll bring them in to be an executive director. Now we're seeing because there's now like pedagogy for the nonprofit space. So now there are master's degrees, there are bachelor's degrees and doctorate degrees for the nonprofit space. Whereas 10 years ago, when I was just graduating from my undergrad degree, a nonprofit management like degree was not even a thing. And so now there is more legitimacy to it instead of people just knowing someone. And so I think that's kind of helping curve a little bit of that, but you still just have people who know people, and that's how they get roles, and that's how they start nonprofits.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. I could just see like donors having their friends becoming executive directors and
Yes.
making all this money and have no skills or experience at all.
That is exactly how it happens.
That's oh,
Exactly how it
my
happens.
God. Okay. And what about retirement? Like I heard before, and I don't know if this across the board, is it accurate or is it true that many nonprofits don't offer retirement for employees?
The ones I've worked at have, thank God, but it's instead of a 401k, it's a 401(b) or something like that. And so that's kind of their like retirement like process. And so they do have them. Fortunately, I've only ever worked at nonprofits that have had some form of retirement. And
Okay.
so, but I can imagine that there would be many that don't offer it at all.
That is outrageous. So not only the low wages, but possibly no retirement. Oh my goodness. Okay.
And I
Oh,
love the
okay.
luxury bucket list comment. It
What?
said that, or a useless nephew, that does happen. A lot of times families will, this is on the grant making side and the nonprofit side. So the people who give the money are usually family ran. And then you have nonprofits that are family ran. So they will bring in their family members to help run the nonprofit.
Oh my gosh.
Mhm.
Ugh. Okay. So they don't have no, I guess not. No, they don't have nepotism thing because it's private. Okay.
Mhm.
Okay. That being said, jobs are trash for Black women in the USA now. It's time to pivot. I agree. I agree. Let's see. Facts, bingo. So glad you got out. It's networking for the elite donors. Yeah, and tax write-offs, but the workers aren't respected, correct? And
Mhm.
while the community doesn't get what they need, the higher ups make it big. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. Performative, they are not truly not invested in solving the actual problems of the community. Some of
Mhm.
them will bring in a gourmet chef for a Thanksgiving meal without engaging the community on the menu, serve food no one wants, and then criticize the community for not appreciating it. Oh my goodness.
Mhm.
Oh my goodness. Antavia has brought such an insightful and poignant perspective on the intrinsic values of some nonprofits. Much appreciation and gratitude for your impactful presence. I agree. Thank you so much for sharing your story. Yes, cronyism happens often. Yes, and it's usually a pay cut for us. Ah, what? That pay cuts?
Yes. So I think they may be referencing like the tax write-offs. And so that's a whole other aspect of like the nonprofit space where donors give and they're able to get tax write-offs and all of these different things. And then in terms of, let me see what the last comment was, networking for the elites, tax write-offs, and then pay cuts. And so a lot of the times if money is being moved around an organization, they will like cut funding in certain places. And so
Mhm.
there's a lot of times there's like budget, they call them when they're restructuring. And so I've been in nonprofits that will restructure an entire programs department, and it's not to help the community, it's to help move money around in the budget. And so the last organization I worked at, they had like their third restructure to where they changed the entire process of how the community was being served, and it made no sense whatsoever. But for some reason, that restructure helped in terms of where they wanted money to go, because they were trying to create a new program with an app, and it was a whole thing. And so certain things get cut, money goes elsewhere. Sometimes community loses program staff, which means they lose access to certain things.
Mhm.
And it's a whole mess a lot of the time.
Wow. Now I wanted to go back to something we were supposed to go back to a long time ago. I'm sorry, I got distracted about all this new information I'm getting right now. I'm getting a lot. I'm getting schooled today. So I wanted to go back to what you mentioned before about white nonprofits
Hmm.
and Black nonprofits. So can you school us some more about that?
So, and this is something that I feel like a lot of people may not be aware of. So, when it comes to Black-led nonprofits and nonprofits primarily serving Black organizations, they receive the least amount of funding in general. And so, the nonprofit industry is $1 trillion industry. And so, when you think of someone like something as simple as the Boys and Girls Club or the YMCA, those are nonprofits that write grants and get funding and have donors. You
Mhm.
think of a small nonprofit in Baltimore, primarily serving Black youth, they are
Mhm.
receiving a fraction of what white-led nonprofits are receiving. Prime
Mhm.
example, the last nonprofit I worked at was primarily white-led. They served primarily white people, white communities, and they were receiving, they had one donor give like $40 million over like 3 years. And then
Mhm.
they had a $20 million budget, but a small nonprofit in South Dallas has an $8 million budget and is receiving a fraction of what white-led nonprofits are receiving. And then you bring into going back to the donor centric fundraising and white proximity and what that looks like, where you see like what I experienced in this white-led nonprofit that I recently left. I unfortunately experienced the exact same thing in a Black-led nonprofit, which comes into play with like the white proximity of kind of recreating. I think it was Audre Lorde who says you can't dismantle the master's house with the master's tools. And so it's kind of that same rhetoric where you have Black-led nonprofits operating like white nonprofits because the
Mhm.
donors are white, because the wealth gap, the chasm of wealth, you have more white donors than you have Black donors. And so when you have an organization that's trying to appease their donors, it's very easy to align with the idea of whiteness and white supremacy, which feeds into white
Mhm.
proximity because that's what you're trying to get to, that's what you're trying to emulate. And so that then trickles down into how the community gets treated. It trickles down into
Mhm.
how even Black leadership is treating other Black employees, which creates the cycle all over again, except this time it's just people who happen to look like you, which is unfortunate.
Ouch. Oh my goodness. So the experiences that you had working in nonprofits that were Black led,
Mhm.
can you talk a little bit about what that was like for you?
Oh, yeah. So that was interesting. I ended up coming into this role as a philanthropy writer. It was a beautiful organization. I loved working with them. I loved working with the kids. And I remember I learned so much because my primary supervisor at the time was a Black woman, and she taught me a
Mhm.
lot about,
Mhm.
fundraising, grant writing, and I learned so much from her. And
Mhm.
going back to the idea of like the white proximity and wanting to be viewed, it's this sense of like people use this metaphor of like crabs in a bucket mentality where there can only be one really successful or one really good person. And by my second year in that role, I had learned so much because I worked so closely with this woman, and she was a very good mentor and she was
Mhm.
just wonderful at her job.
Mhm.
I remember, attitudes kind of begin to shift because, again, I love the nonprofit space. I'm really good at my job and I learn pretty quickly. And it kind of became this thing of I was doing too much, right? And I remember this chief philanthropy officer, she actually ended up exiting her role. And so I was the only one on the team that had the capacity to step into her role. And
Mhm.
because she didn't want me in the role, she had already started to kind of exhibit this kind of sense of like jealousy and like there can
What
only be
can
one
I
good
I'm
person.
sorry.
Go ahead.
Why does she not want you in the role?
I don't know if it was a sense of I think she had been there for 17 years, and I think that she felt like she didn't wanna be replaced even though she was leaving, and I remember, prior to her leaving, she actually placed me on a performance I think it's called the PIP.
The PIP? Are you
Yes, based on the PIP, and I remember
Wow.
sure on that. I was like, are saying that I'm like not performing well and I'm not doing this and you're having to edit my grants. And I'm like, a lot of the edits are just diction choices because you would have said it differently. And I was like, there's really no reason for any of this. And so it ended up being placed on a PIP so that
Oh,
I could not apply for her role.
oh my God. So she sabotaged you.
Yeah, yeah. And so that's kind of like what a lot of, and I've spoken to other people who've experienced the same thing with other, Black-led nonprofits, where it's the sense of this idea of competition, but it kind of feeds into the crabs in the bucket mentality, the white proximity thing of like, unfortunately, like the one good Negro type of idea, there's only be one of us. And so there's that
It was a Black organization.
yeah, it was. hmm hmm
Wow. Wow. Oh my God. And so what led to you leaving that organization, Antavia?
So when I left that organization, once I realized I was not going to be able to get that role, I remember talking to the executive director, who was also a Black man. And I was like, I love this job and I love this role. I was like, what if I just, instead of just being philanthropy writer, can I just be a senior philanthropy writer, right? Because I'd asked for a raise and he was like, no. I said, okay, cool. Can I just be a senior philanthropy writer so that it shows growth on my resume? Because I had been there for 2 years. Once the CPO had left, I had stepped in as a co-interim essentially to her role, unnamed, of course. And I was stepping in and helping lead, meetings with $1 million donors because I was the only one that could do that role outside
Mm.
of the executive director. And he was like, why would we give you a title change and a pay bump if you're already doing the work? And
What?
so, yeah,
Stop.
yes. So shortly after that, I made my exit. So
Wow. Why will we compensate you for your labor if you're already doing the work?
yeah. And that's
You
exactly
talk
what
about
it
white supremacy. Oh my
is.
gosh.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, I'm so glad that you know how to take your goodies and leave.
Thank
When
you.
you know you're not being respected or appreciated. Oh my
It's
gosh,
some
that's
practice to get here.
ridiculous.
Yeah. Mhm.
Okay, okay, okay. Going back to the comments. Okay, you may have a network for it. I've been approached for such roles when the market was better. It would be six figures, but less than we made in the private sector. Let me
Mhm.
see. Absolutely, tax write-offs. Get rid of the money, or the IRS takes it. Okay, so in terms of okay. Oh yes, all this common nonprofits. Yes, or useless nephew. Okay, most community-based organizations do not. That's terrible. So most community organizations do not have retirement. In many nonprofits, there's an unspoken culture that glorifies sacrifice. Can you talk a little bit about that, Antavia?
Yes, I can. To use more personal experience, I once worked as an intern for this one nonprofit. I was a after school program director and I was a summer camp director, stayed to be an after school program director. And I remember it was myself and like maybe 10 other interns. And we often were working, like we would start our days, like wake up 7 a.m., sometimes wouldn't get home till like 10 p.m. And
Mm,
it became this idea of because you were here and because it's a nonprofit, you are here to do the work no matter what. Like you
mm,
are making a sacrifice. And especially if it's a Christian nonprofit, sacrifice
mm,
big. And so
mm,
this was a Christian nonprofit, and we were there essentially to give of our time and to give of our resources. And when we would make comments about, the kind of work that we were doing and how, we, needed better resources. Like we were being provided housing, being provided like a small stipend. But at
mm.
the same time, one of the houses was like infested with mice. And so the
Ah,
were like, hey, can we please, get someone to come in and exterminate the mice? And it was like this idea of, well, it's all a part of the experience. It's part of the sacrifice that you're making. We had interns who were grad students who needed Wi-Fi, like better Wi-Fi. And we were having to essentially rally and like almost like have a whole initiative for why we need better Wi-Fi. And it became this funny joke of you're here and it's a sacrifice. Like this is just what you do. And it's this idea that we had another nonprofit I worked at. We were told that you give of your time and your resources, and all of your gifts and talents are used for the benefit of this nonprofit. And so this is another way of saying unpaid labor is what helps us keep going. And so you're here because it's a nonprofit, and you're here to sacrifice of your time and your energy because you're a good person and because you care and you love the work that you do. And so it's going back to the weaponizing of language. And so that's essentially the glorifying of the sacrifice part, is you're here to suffer, essentially.
Ooh, you're here to suffer, and how dare you stand up for yourself in terms of good working conditions and to have a salary that really, oh my God, wow, it's almost like brainwashing almost.
Yes, it is.
Schemes and scams, shaking my head. Oh, that's a really important part. Bars. Oh, yes. Wow. Nasty work. Yep. I hate that. Wow. PIP was to Black promotional opportunity. Yes. I worked for both white Rand and Black Rand, totally different, but both toxic. Her jealousy. Yeah. That lady, that woman was ridiculous. Yeah. I'm sorry. My work experiences have been with another Black woman in any industry I have worked in. They're very protective in the workplace. Yeah. You know, I've been thinking about, I'm kind of milling over doing another video about
Mm-hmm.
specifically Black women,
Yeah.
some Black women, not all Black women, some Black women in
Mm-hmm.
terms of this competitiveness sometimes in the workplace. I think I'm thinking about how I'm going to address that. Again, some Black women, not all Black women. Okay. Thank you, Antavia, for this ton of useful information. Good luck for all your future endeavors. Yes, thank you. I experienced a similar situation. Wow. It's sad because I think any Black women would want to help, but they get subliminal messages. There can only be one, and we all feel like we're going to eat regardless. Yeah, and that's the part that is so ridiculous, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because when we fall into the white supremacist way of thinking, even though we had a Black organization, which is so ridiculous, when we start thinking that, we see another Black woman as, I'm going to block her.
Mm-hmm.
But it's so ridiculous because me shining, Antavia's shining, Marissa's shining,
Yeah.
that's not going to take away
At
from
all.
anything from us.
Mm-hmm.
It's not going to do that. But sometimes when you're so insecure, you feel the need to try to dim somebody else's light.
Yeah.
And that is so problematic. And I just hope any Black woman who is watching this, if you feel the need to try to dim another Black woman's light, please get some therapy. Please get some therapy and talk to your therapist about that. There is something wrong. There's something wrong. If you feel the need to dim another Black woman's light, anybody's light, but
Yeah.
we're talking about Black women, okay? There's something wrong. A secure Black woman would not do that, would not do that. And that's why I interview Black women, because I'm trying to uplift other Black women. We need to pour into one another. There's nothing that we gain by tearing each other apart. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. So yes, that was infuriating to hear what that woman did to you. You are brilliant, Antavia. Yes, you are. From that perspective, I feel bad and know many of us are in survival mode. Yes. It's the okey doke. Yes. Using us as attack dogs on other Black women hurts us all. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, because there's power in numbers. Absolutely. It actually helps us because she's a positive representation for you in a room you're not in.
Yes.
Yes, sis. I completely agree. They pit us against each other. Yes, divide and conquer. I was
Mm-hmm.
pulling together entire systems meant to serve vulnerable people, often with limited resources, while probably getting little to no emotional support yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot. They keep us insecure. Yeah. I was blocked by two Black women from advancement and one white. Yeah.
Yeah.
So again, unfortunately, these situations keep happening to us, right? But we have to be mindful and know our own worth and recognize when these people are doing this to us, recognize it for what it is, right? See these people are deeply insecure, but also stay away from them because they're dangerous. They're
Yeah.
dangerous. They will try to take you down because they feel in their mind, they really believe that by trying to take you out or take you down, that they're going to advance.
Mhm.
Sadly enough, they will find out in the end that it's not going to help them, right? But my hope is that you distance yourself enough away from them that you're not around to even see it, okay? Now, Antavia, as we're winding down, any
Mhm.
last words you want to share with the community as before we close?
Yes, I first off, thank you for giving me the space to talk about my experience because it's like I said, I started posting and I started sharing my story because I felt like so many people were kind of like boxed in with their own reality and experience because being made to talk about workplace harm, psychological abuse, and manipulation is taboo. But something I want to say that is like, if you're going through this, you are not alone. And I'm
Yeah.
sorry that you have to experience this because I've met so many people who've messaged me and left comments on videos saying that they're going through the same thing, but like you are not the problem and it's not your load to have to carry. And that if you can get out and you can make a plan, please do so. And that you don't have to suffer for a paycheck. You don't have to do that. And you are worth more than that.
Yes, absolutely. And I agree. I agree. Somebody said, Antavia is amazing. Yes, she is. Yes, she is. And, I love what you said that you don't have to suffer for a paycheck. And I want for Black women to know, just like what you said, that we many times feel like we have to stay at toxic jobs because we need to make money. And yes, we know that we need to make money, but I want us to know as Black women that we have options of how we make money. That job, whatever job you're at, that is not the only place where you can make money. The importance for us as Black women is to know we have options and that we also know that we need to exit plan so we can get out of toxic work environments that are harming us, right? So Antavia shared her story today of ending how we started. She resigned from a toxic job to save her mental health. Okay. And we really want to see how she's leading by example. And we need to be mindful of ways that we can plan to
Mhm.
leave a toxic job. So, Antavia, I want to thank you again for being my guest. I want to thank you for sharing so much about the nonprofit world. I thought I knew a little bit more when I interviewed Dr. Orletta Caldwell, and now I know so much more about the nonprofit world. So I'm like, whoa, oh my God, there's so much that needs to be revamped and transformed in this space. And so I just thank you, Antavia. I thank this community for being so supportive of one another, for being supportive to Antavia. And I see another comment came in. Honestly, I've mulled over this for years because I use so much of my life force, creativity, talent, and time, and I wonder what it was all for. I think it was for sometimes we need situations to redirect us,
Mhm.
right? And sometimes we are in situations, and sometimes it's like, God, this is not it.
Yeah.
This is not it, right? And I don't know if you are a spiritual person. I am, and you just keep having these situations like, God, this cannot be it. This is not the path that you want for me, and so I want to just offer you words of support. Maybe sit in silence and really reflect on what is the direction you want to go in, and think about what are the resources maybe that you can follow up on that will help you get in that direction. But again, think about ways you can
Mhm.
plan. Okay. And I see another comment. Thank you, Antavia. I followed you on LinkedIn. Good job. Good job. Okay. So, everyone, as an announcement again, we are Dr. Pamela Buchanan, who is a Black woman medical doctor. We're going to be having I'm Not Your Superwoman holiday detox for
Mhm.
Black women so we can put that cape down. And so, if you are a Black woman who is doing too much during the holiday season and you want to figure out how do I put that cape down and how do I set boundaries with people, and you are feeling like, man, I'm always doing too much for people and I don't know how to stop doing this. I don't know how to stop doing this. We're going to have the holiday detox for Black women. If you want to get on the waiting list for that, information is going across the screen. It is also in the description section of this video. Okay. So hope to see you there. And I saw one last comment come in. Oh, wait, a few comments. Thank you, Dr. Kamani. Thank you for platforming voices from the nonprofit industry with love from Ireland.
Oh,
Hey, sis from Ireland. This was a great live. Thank you so much, sis. Okay, so everyone, please give this video a thumbs up. Also, share this video with at least two other Black women. If you haven't already subscribed to my channel, please do so. Turn the notification bell so you know when I upload another video. Okay, so everyone, I will see you later. Take care, everyone. Bye bye.